What is going on, Diablo 2 fans? Dobrunsky here. In today's video, I want to start a series where I'm going to discuss some potential changes that I would like to see on all 7 of the character classes in Diablo 2 Resurrected. So the reason why I want to make this video series is I can't get over that one sentence about more potential future changes coming to Diablo 2 Resurrected that was highlighted in the patch 2.3 highlights note. So I thought it'd be cool to make a video discussing some of the potential changes, but all of these discussion points are really going to center around 3 specific themes. The first, maintaining the existing meta. The second, making underused skills / dual spec characters more viable. And the third, still maintaining the Diablo 2 feel. So that's kind of the 3 pillars that I want to center these balance changes around. And again, this video is really just the point of trying to stimulate some cool discussion. So again, let me know in the comment section below if you guys agree or disagree with what I'm going to suggest. But a quick reminder before we jump into this series, just want to let you guys know that I do stream twice a week on Twitch. So if you enjoy this YouTube content, any follows on that platform would be very much appreciated. Got the link for my Twitch channel in the description below. That being said, guys, let's jump in. So in today's installment, I want to talk about the Necromancer. Now, I do think that similar to the Sorceress, like last week's video, the Necromancer is largely in a pretty good place, but I do think there is a couple skills that could be tweaked to make a little bit more build diversity with the character. But before I do actually jump into the Necromancer specifically, I do want to talk about some of the discussion that I received in last week's video. And first off, I do want to say that, again, if you guys don't agree with any of my balancing changes or suggestions, please let me know in the comment section below. It's totally cool. I don't care if you don't agree with me. Any sort of discussion around it in general, I think, is good. But the first kind of major talking theme that seemed to be reoccurring in last week's video is I had a lot of people saying that you're only suggesting to buff skills. You can't just buff everything and make everything a viable skill and then have that be a really well-balanced ARPG. Now, I do agree largely with that point, but I do disagree that I was suggesting to buff every skill. There was only a handful of sort of level 12, 18, and 30 skills that I was suggesting to buff. I'm not really saying for the Sorceress, for instance, making Ice Bolt competitive with Blizzard. I do agree that that's not a good route to go for balancing, but I'm going to say I will stand or die on this hill that if you compare Diablo 2 to other modern day ARPGs, so let's just take a look at Path of Exile, for instance, with the 3 different ascendancies with the different character classes, the different possibilities with skill gems and linking different modifiers, and then the massive passive skill tree, or another game like Last Epoch where you have your own individual passive tree, as well as 3 different ascendancies for character classes, and then each individual skill having its own skill tree. There is a multitude of more viable options of making different builds around different skills. So in that case, or those specific games, I do agree that it's good to have kind of a flow of nerfing and buffing and making new meta every different season. But Diablo 2 specifically has 30 skills per character class, and I think that you can argue that for the majority of the character classes, that when you get to end game, at least 20 of those skills really aren't viable. So you're stuck trying to make builds around a few viable skills, which really kind of just funnels down to builds that you see over and over again in D2. So I do think that for Diablo 2 specifically, buffing a handful of underutilized skills to make them more viable and provide different alternative options, while at the same time maintaining a lot of the existing common synergies and keeping those builds intact, will just create more build diversity and will be better for Diablo 2 as a whole. Again, that's just kind of my thoughts on it. I know a lot of people don't agree with that, but that's the hill that I'm going to die on, so that's the first major point I want to talk about. And the second theme is that a lot of people suggested completely removing synergies, going back to patches that had monster balancing like prior to the introduction of synergies, or just removing immunities, that kind of thing. And I don't know if that's the right approach either, because Diablo 2 is definitely not a perfectly balanced game, but I think it's in a pretty good state the way it is right now. If we were to go back to monster difficulty prior to not having synergies, what would that mean in terms of taking on Uber Tristram? Would you have to rebalance that? Would you be able to leave the monsters the way they are, but not having synergized skills, so you're just using weaker like Frozen Orb and some other dual spec build because you can't pound a bunch of points into Blizzard to buff its damage? I don't really think that that is a viable approach either. So I do genuinely believe that a lot of the suggestions I'm making are for the benefit of the game in the long term, but again, like I mentioned, if you don't agree with me, absolutely just let me know or just sound off in the comment section below. So the first tree that I want to talk about is the curse skill tree. Now, in my opinion, this is a very difficult tree to appropriately balance or provide more diversity for a couple of reasons. The first is that the most common used skills on this tree, being amplified damage, decrepify, and lower resistance, they are just superior for 99% of builds, using decrep to slow down bosses, amp damage typically before your corpse explode, and then you can use lower res to support elemental damage dealing characters, or use it in the pits as a poison necro. So you teleport, cast lower res, then cast a nova. As soon as you get a kill, you can cast amp and then corpse explode. So the problem with this tree, in my humble opinion, is just that those skills are just better than every other option you have on the tree. So I have two suggestions to improve this tree and potentially add some diversity. And the first is, how about removing a curse like Weaken, and maybe, I mean, I could have the same animations, but maybe creating a new curse in its place that reduces the magic resistance on monsters. So a Bone Necro is typically a pretty weak variant compared to a Summon or Poison Necro version. So wouldn't it be cool to cast this new Weaken curse that reduces magic resistance, and then your Bone Spear will be more powerful? So you can maybe just play a build where you cast the curse and then just shoot your Bone Spear to kill everything and obliterate it, instead of just getting that first kill and then again using amplified damage and corpse explosion. It might add a little bit of extra diversity. And the other idea that I have to sort of make the use of other curses more viable would be potentially removing all of the prerequisites. Now, this has been done in mods like Path of Diablo and Project Diablo, where the individual curses don't actually have a prerequisite. So you can put one hard point without having to invest other points. So say that you wanted to use lower resistance to support your party, but you primarily use amp damage on your own. Well, you don't have to put points into Weaken, Terror, Iron Maiden, Life Tap, Decrep to unlock this skill, just to have it when you're playing with friends that deal elemental damage. You can just invest one hard point and earn lower resistance. It's a cool way of just providing an incentive to use a couple other miscellaneous curses that you might not use on your main solo setup, but that could help benefit a party in general. So just removing prerequisites and then potentially changing a curse like Weaken for maybe minus magic resistance would be the first two steps that I would take to trying to add a little bit more viability to this tree in general. So now taking a look at the Poison and Bone skill tree, there's a couple modifications I would make to this tree as well, but I do think in general that Bone Wall and Bone Prison do provide some pretty cool kind of safety and crowd control. Bone Armor is great for playthroughs to absorb melee damage. Corpse Explosion is obviously the #1 skill, which I would untouch for the Necro, but I do think in general this tree kind of suffers from two flaws. Now, Poison Dagger is arguably a useless skill, but is a level 6 skill, so I would probably just leave it alone. But I think two of the more underutilized skills here is first being Bone Spear and Bone Spirit. Even with tons of plus skill damage, I think you can only get like up to maybe just touching like 6.5, 7k magic damage. But again, your clear speed is just so much slower compared to like a Hammerden. So I think in general, I would buff the synergies for the Bone Tree by maybe like 2% or 3%. So say instead of 6 across the board, it's maybe 8 or 9. And then for Bone Spear, instead of 7, it's maybe 9 or maybe potentially 10. I just don't think it would be too crazy OP, considering you can get like 17k magic hammers on a Hammerden just slinging through the Chaos Sanctuary. Trying to bring that character a little bit closer to the Hammerden, I think you could do that by buffing the synergies. And the other skill that's almost never used is this one, Poison Explosion. So instead of blowing up a corpse and doing like 70 to 100%, or excuse me, 70 to 120% of corpse life damage, and then again boosting that further with skills like amp damage and lower res or conviction, because half of corpse explosion damage is fire, half is physical, it just obliterates. It is a super powerful skill. Nobody uses Poison Explosion. You just turn a dead corpse into a little poison cloud that does okay damage, but you're just better off spamming Nova. And the two, you can't stack the two damage together on these either. You're only going to be, one of them is going to be doing the poison damage over time. So maybe incorporate this skill somehow being like a pre-buff skill that maybe grants you extra minus poison res that could boost the potential damage of Nova on playthroughs and endgame setups. That's kind of the best idea I have on the top of my head. If you guys have anything better, just let me know in the comment section below, but definitely Poison Explosion is never used, and then I think that the bone skills in general could definitely receive a little bit of a damage buff. And the final tree that I want to cover is the summoning skill tree. Now I do think that largely it's a pretty well balanced tree, but there's definitely 3 kind of standout skills in my opinion that need to be tweaked to be a little bit more viable. And the first one is Raise Skeletal Mage. They just don't do enough damage. I mean, Raise Skeletons with amplified damage is a curse. Revives, like if you're resurrecting Urdars, they can just crush Uber Tristram. Raise Skeleton Mage, they just don't do anything. So I think that they should receive a pretty substantial buff in their elemental damage, because how cool would it be to be running around casting lower res, casting a Nova, and then having a bunch of Raise Skeleton Mages actually doing significant damage. So kind of similar to how an Act 3 Mercenary would be really cool if they buffed up their damage. I think the first skill that deserves a bit of a synergy buff or damage increase is Raise Skeleton Mage. And the other 2 skills here is Blood Golem and Fire Golem. These are 2 skills that are never used on a Necro. I promise you, you're either using Clay Golem with Decrep to significantly slow down the rate at which bosses attack, or you're turning an Insight Runeward into an Iron Golem to grant you a Meditation Aura so you can use a different weapon on your Mercenary. That is the 2 golems that you only ever use. So my 2 suggestions that I have for buffing Blood Golem and Fire Golem to make them more viable. The first, I think that Blood Golem could be more viable if when you grant it, or excuse me, when you cast it, it grants you, let's just say maybe a plus 15 to plus 20% maximum life increase. So using a Blood Golem is kind of like using a level 2 or 3 battle orders from CTA. So as you're progressing through the game, Necros typically have pretty poor health pool in general, excuse me. So wouldn't it be cool if you could temporarily use a Blood Golem to maybe bump your life up on a playthrough instead of your like 700-ish entering Hell, maybe bring it up to just over 1,000, would make this skill a little bit more viable, I think. And for Fire Golem, I think it'd be cool if when you cast it, it reduces enemies' monster fire resistance. So it doesn't necessarily have to break immunities, but it would be cool if it applied some negative fire res, because that would, again, boost Corpse Explosion, because that skill is 50% physical damage and 50% fire. So you're going to be more apt to using a Fire Golem if it reduces some enemy fire res to make your Corpse Explosion stronger. So you're sacrificing either the slowdown from Clay Golem and the Meditation Aura from Insight to either gain a larger life pool with a modified Blood Golem, or a little bit stronger of a Corpse Explosion with Fire Golem. But that is basically everything that I have kind of thought of to somewhat improve the Necro. Again, I do think that it's largely in a pretty good place. Doesn't really have to be too many skills modified to make it more viable. But again, guys, just please let me know in the comment section below if you guys agree with me or completely disagree. Feedback is always welcome. Other than that, guys, hope you enjoyed the video. If you could throw a like on it, really appreciate it. Sub on YouTube and a follow on Twitch would be great as well. And hope you have a fantastic day, and I'll catch you on my next video or live stream. Peace out.